From the Fathead Studio in Speedway, Indiana, this is The Skinny.
Maybe I need to start in the trash truck business.
Don't rule it out.
So my body holds about 11 units of blood, the average human body, guy my size, and I had 22 units put in because I had 2 full oil changes.
He's airborne, and then I'm above him.
Inverted.
All at the same time. Yeah, you're just like, wow, that's a wild picture.
Boom, and then it goes boom, and it comes back out.
I hang up on the guy. I go, who's this? This is Deion Sanders. I go, yeah, nice try. See you later.
Bounce and then this insane roll. That thing sent it.
No. It's okay, you know, we come back. They just do it.
Like, man, am I still pretty? And he's like, you ain't pretty, but you're going to be all right.
If I was a few years older, you might be calling me Grandpappy. That's like, all right.
Hi, I'm Tony Stewart.
I'm Scott Dixon.
I'm Mario Andretti.
I'm Christy Lee.
I'm Travis Pastrana.
Hey, I'm Antron Brown.
Hi, I'm Tim Coffeen, and this is The Skinny.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to The Skinny. We're back in production here inside of the Fatheads Eyewear Studio. I'm Ken Stout. That is Rico Elmore. Our good friend here, an Indiana local native here, right here to the Indianapolis area, Mr. Tim Coffeen has joined us as well out of Brownsburg. And we also have one of the producers of our show, Mr. Stephen Grine, is in the house. He is standing right next to the track dude.
Come on in. There you go.
There he is, personal appearance.
Look at that.
I saw an article, actually it was my wife that saw the article that ran in the local Brownsburg paper there that highlighted you, Tim, and your career and the fact that you started off as a young kid and really had a dream to get into racing, was kind of cultivated here at the Speedway, and you turned it into a very successful career. It was a great article inside of the paper. I'm guessing you were aware it was there, correct?
Elaine Whitesides wrote that story. She's married to Rick Whitesides, who I worked with at Newman Haas. I also worked with Rick at Black Dog Racing. They're good friends. She contacted me and said that she wanted to do a story about me, and I was flattered. And yeah, it was. I enjoyed it very much.
So Tim Coffeen is he's a commentator, he's an author, he's a speaker, he's a historian for IndyCar, and like I say, I was reading that article, and I called Rico up and I said, "Hey, man, I just read this article, and this guy is right here."
And he didn't know your name. Now that's because he didn't see the article yet. He brushed over it. He didn't have your name, and he's like, "I said, give me whose name it is." I said, "We have to know who this guy is." So he says, "I said, okay, yeah. Do you know who it is?" And he goes, "I'm drawing a blank." I go, "Okay, do you remember going to lunch with Robin Miller?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, "Remember the guy talking like Gordy?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, "That's who that is." And then he's like, "I know exactly who that is."
So we got to chat, and of course, then Merle Bettenhausen's name came up, and just that whole gang. So for the fans at home, there was a period of time, and maybe it still goes on. I haven't been over there in a while, but at what was it?
Charlie Brown's,
and also the Working Man Pub? Is that what it's called? Working Man's Friend, which is a pub. That's kind of where it started. I remember going over there with the late Larry Rice and seeing the whole gang over there as well. But it is this group of guys that are an absolute wealth of knowledge and the best racing stories in the world. And this is one of them. We've often talked about how can we shoot a show during that lunch, because it would be incredible.
Yeah. Robin was the backbone of that. Robin Miller. He was the one that he wanted that for all our heroes. I mean, Larry Rice, Gary Bettenhausen, Bubby Jones, Lee Koonsman, Billy Vukovich, Sonny Meyer, Louis' son, on and on. There was Johnny Parsons comes. It was just a gathering and Robin was the one that was adamant about that deal. He put it together. Just once a week it had to happen, and he was the one that did it.
He was there right to the very end.
Yeah,
and Billy too. Billy was there when he came in town and was struggling a little bit there towards the end, but he was there. He was there with the whole crew as usual.
He would walk in the door. Either he would be first or Koomson would be second, and the insults would start flying, and it was a great time.
So I got a great Billy Vukovich story, right? So he used to work next door to our old shop in Brownsburg, okay, at Paces. And, you know, we would hear we were upstairs, our offices were upstairs, and we would hear the door chime. And I would look up and I would see Billy. And then, you know, 20 minutes later, door chime, I'd see Billy walking out. And I finally said to somebody, I said, "What's Billy doing here?" They said, I don't know. I don't know what he does. He comes in and I don't know if he's downstairs or what, right? So one day I get it figured out. He's using our bathroom and blowing it up. And I go, and I catch him and I said to him, I said, "Billy, why our bathroom? You got 2 bathrooms next door." He goes, "Those things are filthy." I'm like, "How about you clean your bathroom and get out of ours?" But he didn't care.
Yeah.
He's
a character.
He absolutely just, and I'm telling you, we used to get, so now I can tell this because he's no longer with us, which I love the guy, absolutely. And so we would get telemarketers calling and they would want to come out and meet with you about credit card processing, whatever, right? So I would send them next door and have them ask for Bill. And he would absolutely lose his mind on him. "I didn't talk to you on the phone. There's no way." Because they were literally right next door. So I see him one day, set him up. And I never got to tell him. I always wanted to tell him. And when we were at lunch that day, he was having a good day. I figured I wouldn't ruin it. So, you know,
that's what friends are for.
Yeah.
I worked at Bettenhausen's. Gary and Merle and Tony had a shop on a country club place out in the west side, and they gave me a job in 75. I worked there 75 and 76. When Billy was in town, Gary would get there about 11 in the morning, and Billy would come, and we go to this place called Parajack's Lounge for lunch every day, and Billy would come. It was springtime. He just got back from Fresno, and he was waiting in the front office to go to lunch. And in those days, you could take the phone and dial 1191 and hang it up, and it would ring. And Gary comes up to me and he says, "Call Billy and mess with him." So I did it. I went in the bathroom and called 1191, and they said, "Billy, the phone's for you." And he goes, "How do they know I'm here?" And I said, I put on my best hillbilly accent, and I said, "Bill, this is Cecil Beavers from Paragon Speedway. We was having an open day on Easter Sunday. We just thought you might be interested in come down here and make a little appearance money." He said, "Well, I don't know if I could do that. I got a USAC license." I said, "I've already contacted USAC, and they gave their approval." And he goes, "Well, how much money are we talking about?" And I said, "It's Easter Sunday. We ought to have a big opening day crowd." I said, "I see right and fit to give you $25. He said, "Who is this?" "I need a job." And he goes, "Don't need any help." And he goes, "And get a haircut, would you?"
The Skinny is brought to you by Fatheads Eyewear. Fatheads Eyewear, hardcore since '04. And American Coach. Innovation is our life force.
Welcome back to the Skinny. We have Mr. Tim Coffeen inside of the studio with us, and we want to touch base with him and find out what his career was like and how it got going. A little bit of research would tell us that he was a young man, and if my research is correct, you were hitchhiking to the Speedway while you were in high school, and you came out, the bug bit you, and you've been part of it ever since.
It started when I grew up at 42nd and Central in Indianapolis, which is about 3 or 4 blocks from the State Fairgrounds. And so the Hoosier 100, the State Fair Century stock car race, you had on the mile dirt track, you had all the Indy car drivers running the Hoosier 100 and the stock car race. And there was 5 brothers that lived down the street from me, the Coogan brothers, and we raced bicycles in their backyard. They had a half paved, half dirt backyard, and we raced bicycles and built our own go-karts out of ironing boards and lawnmower engines, and got the fever. We moved here my mom and dad moved us down here in 1957 in the fall, just before my 5th birthday. I remember in 1958, it was the first year being here for the Speedway, for the 500. And I never forget, it seemed like the checkered flag took over town. I mean, every school had a checkered flag, businesses, houses had the checkered flag, driveways were lined with checkered flags. My mother used to tell our relatives in Chicago that she thought that during the month of May that the American flag in Indianapolis was replaced by the checkered flag. And I remember Jimmy Bryan winning the 500. That was my first year, and that's when I really started getting interested. Then I met the Coogan brothers, and like I said, we raced all kinds of stuff. And we'd get our parents to take us out to tire tests and drop us off. When the Firestone and Goodyear battles started, they were testing out there all day long for most of the year, in fact. And it kept going, and we kept racing, and then we got better go-karts. And in high school, I went to high school, Cathedral High School, when I was at 16th and Meridian, and I would just get off school and I'd hitchhike down the street to the Speedway for tire test or a month of May. And that's how it started with me. And just hanging around in 1968 when they filmed Winning, I went out there every day, and there was no guards anymore. And I'd get in the garage area, and I met a guy named Dick Offinger, who was the chief mechanic for Gordon Johncock's IndyCar team. And they asked him to be a second. He was on Newman's crew in the movie. And he taught me to start up the car, and pretty much, and then he hired me my junior year in high school to come down to New Albany, do his shop and help him. That's how it started for me. I was pretty fortunate.
Wow, that's incredible. And right place, right time, but still working at it very, very hard to get over there and get around those people. I, to this day, have not seen that movie, Winning, with Paul
Right.
Newman. Yeah. I read that article. I'm like, man, I've got to dig that up and watch it.
Now, that was an amazing experience for me to be. I actually got to work around them when they made that. It's like I said, it's through my sophomore and junior year in high school. They filmed it in the summer of '68. And then in 1989, I went to work at Newman Haas Racing. So it was like full circle for me to get to work with him. And
Yes. Super cool. And before you started really digging in on the IndyCar side, did you spend some time driving? You, Jan Opperman, and Bubby Jones, you were close with, and you guys were kind of on the sprint car tour, correct?
Well, that's exactly right. When I got out of, I went to I went to Vincennes University, and then I went to IEPY, but I kept going back to racing. That's a magnetic pull. But it was like the hippie days. I had long hair and a beard. I remember I'd go in and bang on A.J. Watson's door, his shop on Crawfordsville Road. And one day I remember I went in there, it was lunchtime. There was nobody in there but AJ, and he was working on his car. And he looked up and he says, "You again? So what do you want?" I says, "I need a job." And he goes, "Don't need any help." And he goes, "And get a haircut, would you?" So anyway, I had a '64 Volkswagen bus, and I'd seen Opperman race, and he seemed like he had long hair and everything. I said, maybe I can meet that guy. So I got on my Volkswagen bus and I drove to Pennsylvania, and I lived in it over there. And I did meet him one night. I helped him at Williams Grove, and it rained the race out, and I'd helped him all night. And he looked at me and he goes, "Everywhere I go, I see you." He goes, "I just want to." He says, "I'm going to pick your brain. I want to know about you." And it was just that's the kind of guy he was. But going to Pennsylvania and meeting him really changed my life. And if you're affiliated with somebody like him, then suddenly you have credibility. I'll never forget, I hitchhiked to Knoxville one year. I worked on a guy's Formula Ford. I went to Nelson Ledges, Ohio, and the guy gave me $20 for the weekend for helping him. And I got Monday morning, I got back to Indy, and I got my sleeping bag, and I packed my brown leather bag I took to college with me, and I hitchhiked to the Nationals.
To Knoxville, Iowa.
Knoxville, Iowa.
This is a quintessential hippie right here. A VW bus, he's hitchhiking across the country.
That is awesome.
Well, when I get to Knoxville, I'll never forget this. Jan showed up in the afternoon. It was like first day of qualifying, and he got there, and he pulled up, and I went over and said hi and all this, and he was going to get ready to go in, and he had in those days, and when he ran the Speedway in '74, Bell Helmets gave every driver the beautiful white leather helmet bag. Said Indy 500 Bell Helmets. It's beautiful. It was like a duffel bag with long straps. He carried on. He was so proud of that bag. And I'll never forget, he said to me, "Walk with me, and we're going in. You're going to walk with me." And then you walk behind the grandstands at Knoxville. In the old days, it was not buses and what they have now. It was campers and tents. But it was like the Red Sea parted when he's walking and I'm walking next to him. And I'm saying, this is really, I felt I'm somebody next to him. And we got up to the sign-in booth, and he told a guy who was giving credentials, he says, "This kid's with me." He says, "Take care of him, give him 3 nights worth of passes."
Want to get the skinny on other guests in different types of motorsports? Check out our YouTube page and get the skinny.
Welcome back to the Fatheads Eyewear Studio. We have Mr. Tim Coffeen in the studio with us, a local here in the area, the Indianapolis area, a little town on the west side, Brownsburg, Indiana, and it is absolutely loaded with some of the best racers of all time. It's a little racing town for sure, and a lot of really, really successful teams out of there, a lot of cool people that come out of that area. That and Avon, of course, and then, of course, right in this area as well, Speedway, Pittsburgh. I mean, all of those little towns around there just loaded up with racers. That's why we love living here, I guess. Chatting with you as you worked your way through that sprint car career and then eventually up to Bignati, and you start your IndyCar career. And you'd mentioned you were with Gordon Johncock and Mario Andretti in 1978. He had just won his Formula One championship a couple of years prior. What year were you with that team? I know early 80s, but was it 80, 81, 82?
81.
Yeah.
With Patrick in this building.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Inside of this building, we kind of touched on that whenever we were at commercial break. So you spent a couple of years working inside of this building.
Yes, I did. George Bignati hired me at Milwaukee, and after the Speedway in 1980. And I worked here and Jim McGee came at the end of the year to run the team in 81. And I worked here in 80 and 81.
So I do remember this story from lunch. And the story was where, and I can't remember where it was. I want to say it was Pocono maybe. But Gordy said the car was pushing. And whoever it was told him that he needed to go in the turn lower.
I thought it was here at the Speedway.
It was at Michigan.
Michigan. Okay.
Michigan. Instead of telling it out, maybe you could go through the story because it's absolutely hilarious.
We went up to, it was in the summer of 1980 when George was still there. And Gordy was complaining about push. And George told him, "You're not running low enough. You need to go in the corners lower, Gordy." And Gordy said, "Start this thing up." We fired it up and he took off. And he went down the back straightaway and you heard him going in turn 3 and the thing was going.
Just taking it all the way
to the fence. He was kicking up dust. He was so close to the fence. And Johncock, that guy had incredible control. He turned that thing and hooked down off the bank straight into the pits. And Gordy used to do something I've never seen another race driver do. I changed tires on his car. He would come in the pits, and the last 4 or 5 feet before he stopped, the left front tire would lock up, and then the car would stop and go backwards. I've never seen anybody before or since do that. And he looked at Bignati across his arms, and he goes, "Now fix it." He's scared. We thought he was going to crash. He was in control, but he said, "Just start it up, and I'll show you."
That was super cool. So what was it like being on the team with those two dynamic personalities, Gordon Johncock and Mario Andretti?
They got along pretty well, I thought. But Mario, at the time, in the days before he had 4 and 5 cars and a bunch of engineers, and they always these days, they take the information from one car and give it to the next car. Well, Mario was the kind of guy that he did most of the development work there. Gordy's a brilliant race driver, but technically he wasn't your test driver. And Mario Andretti is the most passionate guy I've ever been around when it comes to, he loves testing as much as he did racing. Anytime he'd see something new or want to try, but Mario wanted his own team. And that's why he went to Newman Haas in 1980 for the start of the 83 season. He wanted control over everything. And I'm getting off the subject here, but that's how Michael got into Newman Haas, because he lost his ride with Krakow and they hired Ray Hall. And the only person that Mario would have driving that second car was his kid. And that's how that came to be. And when they got the Kmart Haviland deal, it all came to be. Mario was something else. And that's the reason that deal happened at Newman Haas.
Great stuff. He's mentioned it a couple of times. Newman Haas, that's who he went to work for in 1983, and we'll touch on that when we come back. He had a lot of success there.
And Nigel grabbed him by the shirt, pulled him in the car, and I said, we're going to get along, this guy.
You're looking at Tim Coffeen. He has joined us here in the studio, the Fatheads Eyewear studio, I should say. Welcome back to the Skinny. Might notice that that ring, which I've failed to ask him about yet, but it certainly caught my eye the second he walked into the room. Looks like a championship winning ring there. What year is that from, Tim?
1993. It's when Nigel Mansell won the championship.
Does that one have some significance to it over the other 6?
Anytime you win a championship. I mean, racing with Mansell was an incredible experience. I mean, he left Formula One, didn't even defend his championship, and came to work for us. And Michael had left. That's the reason he got the ride. And I worked with Mike for 4 years, and he won 20 races in 4 years. And it hurt when Mike left, but Mr. Haas called us all together and said, you'll be pleasantly surprised. He goes, Mike's leaving, but I'm going to have an announcement to make. And a couple days later, Carl walked in the back shop with Nigel Mansell. And
Wow.
it was pretty, right off the bat, you could tell the guy's really smart. He looked at our car and he goes, what's that archaic brake line you got on that thing? He said, what, number 3? He goes, you need to run number 2. It'll give you a harder pedal. And this is, he just walked in the door. Remember, he got in the car to get fitted, and the chief mechanic was Tom Wirtz, and Nigel had a cardigan sweater and a tie on. Looked like a proper English gentleman. And Wirtz leaned into the cockpit, and he says, do you always drive with a tie on? And Nigel grabbed him by the shirt, pulled him in the car, and I said, we're going to get along. This guy looks like we could have some fun.
I heard he was tough as they come.
Yeah, it was... And in some respects, I mean, a lot of people, the second year didn't go as good as the first one. And him and Mario, I don't think they got along that well. I mean, going back to their F1 days at Lotus. But Carl Haas told me I was working on Mansell's car, and that's what I did. And we won the championship in 93. And it was a great year. I mean, for him, unfortunately, he never got, when he came to Indianapolis for the first time, he'd never run on an oval. We tested him at Phoenix, but when we went back for the race, he crashed in practice and never got to run. And he hurt his back and had to have surgery. And Indy was his first oval race. But he won the last 4 oval races of the year. It's ironic, him being world champion. He won the first race he ever drove for us in Australia. It was brilliant drive. He won the first time he ever drove for, won the pole and won the race. And but that was the last road course race we won, and all the rest of the wins were ovals, and he won the championship.
How many Indy 500 races you have?
I don't have any 500. I got championship.
Ken almost got one.
See, I'm not the only one. He likes to rub it in, man. He really likes to. Those things are pretty hard to get.
Yeah, it's that place down there, though. I mean, the John Cock, like I said, he lived 56 laps that day, and 6 laps from the end, broke a Gilmer belt in his engine when Bobby won. And then Michael in 89, when I was working with the first year he drove for Newman Haas, my first year there, we got disqualified because the car was 3 pounds underweight after qualifying our first time. And they put it, and then we had to requalify in 21st and started 21st. And he came from the back and was leading the race. And he did something that day that I'll never forget. I mean, I was watching him, and he would come into sight before anybody running. He was so low on the track, and everyone else was out against the wall. And he was running super low back before they had the rumble strips on the inside and all that. But the 3 guys I remember as a kid, or the young mechanic or whatever, Bobby Unser and Lloyd Ruby and Michael Andretti, they run that low line. And Al Unser told me one time, he said, you can always tell how a guy's car's handling at the speedway. He says, if he's in the grass, it's pushing. If he's on the line, the car's handling neutral, it's good. If he's in the gray, it's loose. And Michael ran a unique, I mean, 1992, he started 6th, outside second row, and he was leading in the first turn. I mean, Michael was magnificent at the speedway. I don't care. And I don't think he really enjoyed running there that much. I'm just being honest. I mean, race day, look out. I mean, he was coming, but I'll never forget, we were practicing doing race setup the way the speedway used to be with 4 days of qualifying, you'd get the thing in the show on the first week, and then we'd take the spare car and test race setup, do all your changes because you're going to run 40 gallons of fuel in those days and different aerodynamics and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, it was Mike. It was real windy one day when we were doing full tank setup. And I'll never forget Mario coming up, still had his helmet on. He was in the pit behind us, and he leaned into Mike and he says, "Hey, Mike, tell you guys to take your car back to the garage. I'll do the testing." And Mike said, "Okay, Dad." Is that Paul Newman? And Robin looked at him and says, "That guy over there in white?" "No," he says, "he's a painter at the track."
The Skinny is brought to you by American Coach. American Coach, innovation is our life force. And Fatheads Eyewear. Fatheads Eyewear, hardcore since '04.
A nice wide shot here at the Fatheads Eyewear studio. That is Mr. Tim Coffeen sitting on the far side. Great to have him join us here in the studio. Of course, Rico, Elmore, I'm Ken Stout. We've got the track dude running the controls as always. And speaking of the track dude, he has been heavily involved in IndyCar, as has Tim, and been out there doing it for a long, long time. I know you want to chime in here, man, and some good questions. They always come up during the commercial break, but you had mentioned, of course, his involvement with Paul Newman, and then also Carb Day.
Carb Day. Well, there's so many, but Tim, we were just talking about Nigel, and I've had the luxury of working with Sebastian Bourdais for so many years, and I asked him once his thought of Paul Newman and his memories of Paul Newman, and he actually started to get choked up talking about Paul. But what was it like to work with that man?
Well, the thing that I came to realize about Paul was he was one of the most passionate racers that I was ever. He loved racing more than it was. He was totally supportive of the team. I remember when Bruno got hurt, Junqueira got hurt in 2005 at the Speedway, crashed during the race and broke his back, and he was out for the year. And his first time back in the cockpit was at Sebring in December. And Paul flew down. He flew down just to support the driver. And that's where the story came from about Robin Miller and Paul going to have breakfast at Sebring and the local Greasy Spoon. And Newman always wore white. He always had a long sleeve white golf shirt on, white pants, and white deck shoes, and his white baseball racing team hat. And when they were leaving, Miller, of course, Newman didn't have any money, and Robin paid. And the guy at the cashier says, "Is that Paul Newman?" And Robin looked at him and says, "That guy over there in white?" "No," he says, "he's a painter at the track." But Paul was he was just him and Carl Haas and Bernie Haas were such a great bunch of people to work for. I mean, it was the highlight of my racing career to be able to work for those people. And Paul, like I said, he absolutely, I mean, he never missed a race. I mean, he didn't go to Australia and stuff like that, but he was always there in your corner. And I remember one of our guys got hurt at Milwaukee in '99, got run over during a pit stop, and Paul was out the door straight with him to the hospital. That's how he supported us.
Wow. That was one of the great stories I heard about Paul Newman. He's up speaking to these people, and it was his philanthropy side with all of his food products, which I thought was amazing. He took nothing out of it. It all goes to charity. And you know, he was smooth, man. I mean, just whatever. He was super smooth, and he's up there doing this interview or, speaking to this group, and this lady comes up to him afterwards and says, "Have you ever thought about getting into acting?"
He said, I could never do it.
He said, "I'll consider it."
We were leaving Detroit one night, which is an island, the road course, and Pete Murphy, who ran our bus at Newman Haas, the hospitality director, him and his wife Mary Lynn took care of hospitality for us. Came up to the mechanics on Michael's crew and said, "Would you give Paul a ride to the motel? He needs a ride back to the motel." And sure. So gets in the front seat of the van with the mechanics, and we're going to drop him off at his hotel. Well, it was traffic. They were letting out like 10 cars at a time and to go over the bridge, and they'd stop. And this lady was walking on next to the van, and she looked in there and she saw Paul, and she walked fast when we were rolling along and then slowed down and finally knocks on the window, and he rolls the window down and he's drinking a Budweiser. And she says, "Could you just put your glasses down and so I could just see your eyes one time?" And he goes, "Lady," he says, "I'd love to. The last time I did that, my pants fell down." And the window goes up. Cop says, "Come on," and we take him back to the hotel. I just thought I'd walk out here and see if your balls are as big as everybody else says they are.
Welcome back to The Skinny. Great to have Mr. Tim Coffeen inside of the studio with us. As you might have heard there in the previous segment, worked for the Newman Haas team for over 20 years, won 7 championships in the process with some of the biggest name drivers of all time. So a lead mechanic for those guys, and saw the entire sport really transform from the 70s up really to just about where it is here today. I know, Rico, you wanted to bring up a friend of yours, certainly one of your mentors, and Bubby Jones. We talked about him at the start of the show. Charismatic guy, and I mean, he's a Hall of Famer. He's a sprint car Hall of Famer.
How did that connection happen?
Well, like I said earlier, I was hanging around the Midwest dirt tracks, and anytime Bub showed up, his pit was, all the locals were hanging around his car. And I was working on different guys' cars, and he was really hard to get to know. He was focused on what he was doing, number one. And but I'd say he'd win a race, and I'd say good job, and he'd say thank you. And that's about what I get out of him. And how I actually met him was I was working at Bettenhausen's, and we were at Eldora. It was spring race, and Jan and Bubby were standing outside of our trailer talking. And Jan called me over. He goes, "Bubby," he says, "You know Timmy?" He said, "Stick out your paw. He won't bite you." And that broke the ice between Bub and I. And Bub started coming by Bettenhausen's. And when I really got to know him was in 1976 at the Indy Mile. It was a Friday night sprint car race. And Merle Bettenhausen, I worked there. We took a trailer with fuel and Goodyear tires and stuff to the races. That was my job. And he told everybody in the pits that night, "I'm not going to Findlay, Ohio tomorrow night." And Bub was standing there, and he told Bub, "If you want anything for the weekend, get it now, because I'm not going tomorrow." And Bub looked at me and he goes, "What are you doing tomorrow?" And I said, "Well, I guess I got the day off." And he goes, "You want to go to Findlay with me?" And I went to Findlay with him and M.A. Brown, who owned the car, who was a real character. And that's what started it. And later on that year, Bettenhausen sold the shop, and I started helping Jan. He got hurt at the Hoosier 100, and Bub picked me up and took me with him. He took me out to Manzanita when he won the Western States. I got to go and do that with him. And it was way more than just helping somebody in a race car. He really treated me good. I mean, I raced myself, and I destroyed my car at Paragon one night, and I was going to buy a car from Bobby Atkins here in Indianapolis as a chassis builder. I was going to get a new car, and Bub called me the next day, and he said, "I heard you crashed." I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Don't buy a car. I'm going to build you one." And he gave it to me. I mean, that's the kind of friend Bubby Jones was. But he was Bubby was a self-made man. He started out racing motorcycles as a kid. And he told me a story when he started racing. He would start driving for his brother-in-law over in Champaign, Illinois on the quarter mile. And he said he was fast when the track was tacky early on, but then when the track slicked off, it used to spin out. And he said that Don Branson, the IndyCar driver, came into his pit. He was from Champaign. He was sitting in the stands. He came down and told Bub, he says, "Take your tie rod off your steering arms and give it to me." And he said the Branson walked over and hit it on a phone pole, bent it. And he goes, "Your toes won't be right now, but you won't spin out anymore." And that's how Bub learned. And he was a common sense guy. And anywhere you went with him, he was the most respected. People I remember I went to Manzanita. It was just him and I when he was driving a Longhorn, and we drove the truck out there, him and I, and we got there and unloaded. Donnie Ray, the chief, flew in. Everett flew in and met us, and we were getting ready for hot laps for the Western States at Phoenix, biggest race of the West Coast that year. And Kenny Weld walked up to the car, and Bub had told me that he'd had a lot of respect for Kenny Weld, but he'd never met him. And I said, well, this is odd. And Kenny Weld walked up, and he's leaning on the roll cage looking down at Bub. And Bubs looks up and he says, what's going on? And Kenny Weld says, I just thought I'd walk out here and see if your balls are as big as everybody else says they are. Oh, my Lord. And Kenny just turned around and walked away. And Bub looked at me and said, I like that guy.
That's Kenny Weld of Weld Wheels.
Greg Weld's brother. That was him. He was a magnificent racer. And but that was Bub. Man.
Yeah, I know you wanted to give him some due. You have a lot of gratitude towards the opportunities he gave you.
He did. And I mean, he took me to the Speedway with him when he ran for Longhorn. He called me up, and Bobby Hillen told him if George Snyder qualified on the first weekend, they had one of Big Noddy's Wildcats. He said, Bub, they get her in the show this weekend. We'll put you in the Old Eagle next weekend. And Bub called me on Sunday morning and said, get your ass over here. We're going to run. And what was so cool about that year was you had to have your rookie test done by Wednesday in those days, because they didn't want 4 days of qualifying. You had 50 guys trying to make the show. They didn't want rookies on the track on Thursday and Friday before qualifying, so the guys, the vets, could practice. And Bub did 7 laps of his rookie test and lost the engine. And that was on Wednesday. So by the letter of the rules, you're out. But USAC came in and said, if you can get another engine in the car tomorrow morning, and we'll let you take the whole test. And Donnie Ray Everett worked all night, put another offie together, and Bub passed his test. And I'll never forget, you got 3 qualifying strikes then. You got 3 attempts to make the show. And he had 2 strikes and didn't have the speed. And I remember there's 3 drivers, Larry Cannon and John Mailer, and there's a couple guys sitting on the wall with their helmets on their knees next to Bub's car. And in those days, if you're not getting it up, you're going to get fired, and they're going to put another guy in that car. Well, Bub told me, he said, a lot of drivers got jobs, machinists, truck drivers, or whatever. He goes, all I did was race. I made money racing. That was my living. I cut hair as a kid, a barber, but he said, that's pressure. He said, you're down to your last strike on a Sunday afternoon at 4:30 in Indianapolis. You got 2 guys sitting on a wall. Well, he answered the call. He went out at 5 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon, 4th day of qualifying, and he picked up 3 miles an hour. I don't know how he did it, but he qualified for the Indianapolis 500. And I don't care. That was the ultimate in his drive. He didn't pay a dime for that ride. He got hired because of that right foot and what he could do. He was a racer. And that was one of the great days of my life. But the steering, the spokes on the wheel straight ahead, the steering's broken. Bridges takes the wheel. He goes, oh.
The Skinny is brought to you by Fatheads Eyewear. Fatheads Eyewear, hardcore since '04. And American Coach, innovation is our life force.
Welcome back to the Skinny. Michael's messing with me. That's what he does over there. Put him in control of some knobs, and then he starts counting to me.
There we go.
Great to have everybody in the studio here, including Mr. Tim Coffeen has joined us, and some wonderful stories with his time involved in the industry, sprint cars, and of course IndyCar.
And it's one of those shows where it went just like that.
Yeah, we got it. We're in the final segment, so. Yeah, it just goes away. We have to have you back, man. We'd love to have you. You and Merle would be a great show. You and Bentonhausen in here, and we'll have some fun.
Thank you.
I know you wanted to talk about your good friend Robin Miller here a little bit as well. So
I got to ask you a question about this, and this is part of that. Robin would always bring pictures to the lunch.
That's right.
What started that? How did that all?
Well, Robin was very gracious.
Yeah.
But he had an incredible passion for racing. And he'd come to lunch with photos. He'd go to these memorabilia things, and he'd spend $1,000. And he'd come to lunch, and he'd give them away.
Oh, wow.
Oh, he would give them away.
Really?
Oh, yeah. He that's the kind of guy he was. I mean,
and they were great pictures. That was, I believe, well, I know I gave him one of those books. So the scrapbook that we were talking about.
Yeah.
But I never got to show him the original. So I was showing him the original. We were looking at these pictures from 1947 that looked like glass.
Oh, they were beautiful.
I mean, they are unbelievable photos. So yeah, I always wondered that, because man, he'd pull a thing out and everybody was like, "Oh, look like you met a Kinko's again," or whatever.
I was only there for a few of those lunches, but every time I went there, he'd pull out a stack of them. It was awesome.
Yeah, Robin was he didn't sugarcoat anything. He'd tell you what he thought.
Oh yeah.
And he was a racer through and through. I mean, I helped him a lot with his midget when he drove, travel. He did the kindest thing for me. In 1978, in August, there was a 2-day deal at Erie, Colorado, USAC Midget Show. And he didn't have any help.
Erie, Colorado.
Really, it's a high bank. It was a high bank dirt track. I don't know. I heard it might have got paved, but it's north of Denver. A really fast joint. And I rode with him out there because he didn't have any help. Well, we ran one night, and the next morning the phone rang, and he called me Fino. He says, "Fino, it's for you." It was Steve Chassid. And Chassid was working at Grant King's at the time, race shop on the west side. And he said, "Timmy," he said, "you always told me you wanted to be a race driver." I was 25 years old. I hadn't driven anything yet. And he says, "I got you a ride tomorrow night at Bloomington, a guy's sprint car." And he goes, "And I told the guy, if you crash it, I'll fix it." And he goes, "And if you don't come back here," he goes, "don't ever ask me to help you again." And he hung up. So Robin looks at me, and we just woke up, and he says, "What's going on, Timmy?" And I told him, and I said, I probably had $20 in my pocket, and I'm 1,000 miles from home. I said, "Oh, there goes my one chance in life to drive a race car." And Robin says, "I'm taking you back." He drove 2,000 miles round trip to run one midget race and took me home so I could race. That's what kind of friend Rob was.
That's how important racing was to him, and he knew where you were.
Well, we went up and down the highways together when he had his midget, and we'd be up racing. And you know what he did for me one year? I used to make noises and imitate people and stuff. And he talked to the promoter at in Worthington, Minnesota. And it was a USAC midget race, like around 4th of July, and he had a big crowd there. And he says, "This guy makes noises and he tells stories." He said, "If you can give him $100, he'll get up and entertain your crowd." And I got up and did that. He went up there with me and prodded me on and gave me a $100 bill. I mean, this promoter gave me $100. That's what he did for me. I mean, he always took care of his
we gotta wrap things up here, but you just dug your own hole. So you got to give us, speaking of imitating people, when we were sitting at that lunch meeting and you were talking, you were imitating Gordy a lot. So you got to give us a little something here before we go.
Well, at Phoenix in 1981, I was working on Gordy's car, and I was running the starter. There was like 4 minutes left in practice, and you could get a bunch of laps on that mile track around 20 seconds. So you got to be ready to go when they say go. Billy Camphausen, the tech guy, comes by and says, 1 minute. So Bridges, the chief mechanic, tells me to start the engine. I start the engine up, and the light goes. We're exit to turn one. And so we're going to be first out. We're going to have a clean racetrack, and you can evaluate if you made a wing change or whatever you do. You can run some laps and figure out if something's going to help you or not. So the light turns green, and everybody takes off, and Gordy's just sitting there. We're going, "What is going on?" And I run in one side of the cockpit, and Mark sticks his head in the other and goes, "What's going on, Gordy?" He said, "The steering's broke." He said, "What do you mean the steering's broke?" He goes, "The wheels just turn hard to the right, but the steering, the spokes on the wheel straight ahead, the steering's broken." Bridges takes the wheel and he goes, "Whoa." And that guy won 2 Indy 500s and a championship. It was a brilliant race car driver.
And that's exactly why we had him on the show. Tim, thanks for your time, man.
No, thanks
You're
for
welcome anytime. Brother.
Anytime.
Anytime, you're welcome back. Love the stories. Absolute solid gold. Thanks to Rico, of course, and the track dude. I'm Ken Stout. Hope you enjoyed the show. It was a fun one to do for sure. We'll see you next week.